The Pacific is a brutal, beautiful liar. One moment it's glass under a full moon, and the next it's a churning black fist trying to hammer my boat the second chance into splinters. The storm wasn't on the forecast. They never are the ones that matter, the ones that take men. Salt spray stung my face, mixing with the sweat of fighting the wheel. My hands, calloused from a lifetime of hauling nets and tying knots, were white-knuckled and aching. The radio crackled with the frantic, broken Spanish of other captains, caught out here, their voices swallowed by static and the roar of the wind. This was my world, the ocean off the coast of Astoria, Oregon. It gave you a living with one hand and tried to kill you with the other. I'd just won the fight, the boat steadying, as I punched through the worst of the squall when the satellite phone screamed. Not the radio, the sat phone. That sound at 2:17 in the morning in the middle of a blow. It's a punch to the gut. Nobody calls with good news. I fumbled for it, nearly dropping the thing. Heron. Mr. Heron, this is Sergeant Miller, Astoria Police. The voice was too calm, a flat line over the chaos. We need you to come in. We've got your nephew. My blood went colder than the water crashing over the bow. Evan Ware. Cannon Beach. The old Ecola Creek Lodge. The place is a ruin. He was holed up in one of the basement storage rooms. He's okay, shaken up hypothermic, but he won't talk to anyone but you. The second chance seemed to shrink around me. I'm an hour out, less if I push it. Don't push it and become another casualty, Mr. Heron. We've got him. He's safe. I killed the engine. Let the boat ride the swells. My mind was a reel of bad memories. My brother Rowan's funeral, 3 years back, the empty casket, because the sea never gave him back. The look on his wife Lissa's face, not grief, but a terrifying hollow relief. And Evan, just a little guy, then clutching my leg like I was the only solid thing in a world that had just fallen apart. I pushed the throttle forward. The diesel engine roared in protest. The storm could have the sea tonight. I had to get to shore. The drive to Cannon Beach was a blur of wiper blades slapping against a relentless downpour. My truck smelled of diesel, damp wool, and fear. 3 days. Evan had been missing for 3 days while Lissa told everyone he was at a friend's house. It was old Mrs. Gunderson, who ran the antique shop, who finally called it in. Said she saw a small boy ducking into the abandoned lodge, thought it was just her eyes playing tricks until the second day. The old Ecola Creek Lodge was a ghost of Oregon's Gilded Age, all rotting timber and broken windows standing defiant against the coastal tempests. Police cruisers painted the crumbling facade with flashing red and blue lights. A young cop in a rain-slicked jacket met me at the yellow tape. Mr. Heron, I'm Miller. He's in the ambulance, getting warmed up. I pushed through the scene, my boots crunching on broken glass and plaster, and there he was, swallowed by a foil blanket in the back of the ambulance, a paramedic kneeling beside him. He was so small, smaller than he had any right to be. Dirt smudged his cheeks and his eyes. God, his eyes. They were the same blue as Rowan's, but they weren't seeing this ambulance. They were staring at some horror only he could see. I crouched down, the rain dripping from my jacket onto the asphalt. Hey, buddy. His head turned slowly, the movement robotic. Uncle Gage. Yeah, it's me. I'm here. His lower lip trembled. Mom said she'd come back. She said to wait right there. The words weren't a punch. They were a harpoon straight through me. I kept my face a mask of calm, the same one I used when the weather turned and panic was a luxury that got you killed. Inside, something cold and permanent locked into place. I knew Lissa was unstable, but this, leaving a 5-year-old in a condemned building on the coast in winter, she was wrong, Evan. My voice was steady, the tone I used to talk a greenhorn through a dangerous maneuver. Absolute certainty, no room for doubt. You're with me now, and I don't let go of what's mine. A small freezing hand emerged from the blanket and found mine. His fingers were like little icicles. Can I come home with you, he whispered. You're already home, kid. Let's get out of this rain. Sergeant Miller handed me a clipboard. Children's Services will be in touch tomorrow. For tonight, he's all yours. We'll need a formal statement. I signed without reading. My entire world had shrunk to the weight of that small, cold hand in mine. The drive to my little craftsman house near the harbor was quiet, just the hum of the heater and the rhythm of the rain. Evan was asleep against the passenger window before we even left the parking lot, exhausted, the blanket pulled tight around him. I kept glancing over, checking the rise and fall of his chest, making sure he was real, that he was here. I carried him inside his weight, nothing in my arms, and tucked him into the bed in the spare room. The room that had been waiting for weekend visits that had become fewer and farther between as Alyssa spiraled. Uncle Gage. His voice was a thread of sound in the dark. Yeah, buddy. Is Mom coming back? I sat on the edge of the bed. The truth. It was all I had ever given him. I don't know, but you're safe here. That's the only thing that matters right now. He nodded a small, tired movement and closed his eyes. I waited until his breathing deepened before walking into my small living room. I poured 3 fingers of whiskey but didn't drink it. Just stared at the liquid, remembering the last time I saw Alyssa, the smell of wine on her breath as she told me she needed a break. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. A text from an unknown number. Heard they found him. I need some space to breathe. Don't try to find me. I deleted the message. The whiskey went down the sink. The storm outside was finally passing, but I could feel a different one gathering. I looked at the closed door to Evan's room. This wasn't a weekend visit anymore. This was forever, and I had no idea how to be anyone's forever. The first 2 weeks were a delicate dance of quiet routines and unspoken fears. My little house on the harbor became our sanctuary, filled with the smell of coffee salt air and the sound of Evan's quiet breathing at night. He was a ghost of himself, jumping at the slam of a screen door, his eyes constantly scanning the street like he expected her to materialize from the coastal fog. I called in a favor from Maria, who ran the daycare center next to the fish market. She agreed to let Evan stay with her during my shifts. Her place was a chaos of crayons and building blocks, a world away from the silent dread of my house. It was there I saw the first flicker of the boy he used to be, helping a smaller kid stack blocks, a tiny, serious foreman on a construction site. Meanwhile, I started digging, not with my hands, but with questions. My first stop was Old Man Henderson's maritime insurance office. The place smelled of pipe tobacco and mildew, a fortress of paperwork from a bygone era. Henderson had insured every boat in Astoria since the Kennedy administration. He knew things. Rowan's policy, I said, sliding into the worn leather chair opposite his desk. I need to understand it. Henderson peered over his spectacles. That's confidential, Gage. You know that. Evan's living with me now. Permanently. Lissa's gone. I need to know what I'm dealing with. For his sake. He studied me for a long moment, then sighed, heaving his bulk out of the chair to pull a thick file from a cabinet. Your brother was a careful man. Paranoid, some said, after what happened to your father. He slid the file across the desk. Life insurance, yes, but that's not the main event. I opened the file. The numbers made my head swim. It wasn't just a policy. It was a complex trust woven through with clauses and conditions. The bulk of it was tied up in something called Maritime Futures and Holdings. What is this? Your brother's real legacy, Henderson said, tapping a yellowed newspaper clipping tucked inside. It detailed a lawsuit from a decade ago. A shipping company had tried to strong-arm local fishermen out of a newly discovered crab bed. Rowan had been the loudest voice against them. He'd won. The article mentioned a quiet, out-of-court settlement for the fishermen whose seasons were ruined by the company's strong-arm tactics. The amount was redacted. He didn't just save that season, Gage. He broke them, took his settlement and invested it. Smart, quiet. That trust, it's not just money. It's a weapon. It's control over a percentage of the North Pacific shipping lanes. It matures when Evan turns 21. Until then, the legal guardian controls the dividends for his care and education. The weight of it settled on me, cold and heavy. This wasn't an inheritance, it was a kingdom. And Lissa hadn't come back for her son. She'd come back for the throne. That afternoon, I took Evan down to the docks. The second chance was his, now I decided. He needed something solid to hold on to. Something real. Can I touch it? He asked, his voice small against the cry of the gulls. She's yours, buddy. Every splinter. He placed a small hand on the boat's weathered hull. A connection sparked something deep and primal. For the first time since I'd carried him out of that ruined lodge, his shoulders didn't look like they were carrying the weight of the world. But the piece was fragile. 3 days later, I was mending nets on the porch when Sheriff Miller's cruiser pulled up. He got out his face a mask of polite neutrality that put me instantly on edge. Gage, just making the rounds. Heard about your situation. Wanted to check in, see how the boy's settling. He's fine, we're fine. That's good to hear. Miller leaned against the railing, looking out at the water. It's just, we got a call. Anonymous. some concern about a minor being around commercial fishing equipment, dangerous stuff for a kid. The netting in my hands suddenly felt like a noose. He's not on the boat. He's with Maria at the daycare. I know that. You know that. But people talk. You know how it is. He gave me a look that was meant to be sympathetic but landed as a warning. Just be careful. Perception is a funny thing. After he left, the cozy house felt like a cage. Someone was painting a target on my back using the town's gossip mill as their brush. Lissa was here. She wasn't just hiding, she was hunting. My suspicion was confirmed at the Rusty Anchor, the bar where fishermen went to drink away their problems. I was buying a bag of ice when I overheard two deckhands from a rival boat. Heard the kid's mom is back in town. Staying at that fancy new hotel up on the hill? Yeah, thought she split years ago. Guess she heard about the payday. Smart lady, better than leaving him with Gage. You see him lately? Looks like he's one bad wave away from going over the edge. I left the ice melting on the counter. The fight wasn't coming, it was already here. That night I sat Evan down at the kitchen table. The truth was the only anchor we had. Your mom, she's in town, I don't know where, but she's here. He didn't look surprised, just resigned. She wants the money, doesn't she? The kid was 5 going on 40. Yeah, buddy, I think she does. The money Dad left. How do you know about that? He shrugged, tracing a knot in the wood of the table. I heard her fighting with him about it. Before, you know, she said it was her money, that she deserved it for putting up with everything. A flashback, sharp and painful, 3 years earlier. Me bringing groceries to their cramped apartment. The smell of stale wine and perfume. Rowan, thin and tired, trying to calm a screaming Lissa. It's for his future, Lissa. It's not a shopping spree. Her voice a shard of glass. I am his future. I'm stuck here because of him. I'd left that day with a knot in my stomach, a premonition of the storm that would eventually swallow my brother whole. It's for you, Evan, all of it. Your dad made sure of that. He was quiet for a long time. I don't want it. I just want to stay here. The simplicity of it broke my heart. You will, I promise. But promises felt flimsy against the kind of money and manipulation we were facing. I needed a weapon. I needed to find her. The next morning I went to see Tom Brennan, the family lawyer. His office was in Portland, a world away from the smell of fish and salt. It smelled like money and worry. She's laying groundwork, Tom said, steepling his fingers after I laid it all out. The anonymous calls the rumors. She's trying to establish a pattern of instability of danger. She'll petition for emergency custody based on unfitness, then swoop in as the concerned rehabilitated mother. She abandoned him in a condemned building. And she'll say she was having a mental health crisis, that she's gotten treatment, that she's a changed woman. The court looks favorably on reunification, Gage. Biology has a powerful pull. So what do? We become bulletproof. Document everything. His meals, his schoolwork, his doctor's visits. No more boat, not even for a minute. Nothing that can be twisted into neglect. You have to be more than a guardian. You have to be a saint. I drove home feeling like I was navigating a minefield in a fog. The freedom of the sea was gone, replaced by the claustrophobic pressure of someone else's rules. That evening, as we walked back from Maria's, a sleek white SUV slowed as it passed us. The windows were tinted, but I felt her eyes on us. On him. Evan's hand tightened in mine. The SUV turned the corner and was gone. But the message was received. I could feel her circling us, a shark in dark water, waiting for the right moment to strike. The mystery wasn't if she would make a move anymore. It was how and when, and what she was willing to do to win. The pressure didn't let up. It just changed shape. It was no longer a shadowy threat. It was a vice tightening one turn at a time. The anonymous calls to child services became a weekly event, each one more elaborate than the last. Evan was seen wandering the docks alone. I was seen drinking on the job. The lies were audacious, and the sheer volume of them was their own kind of weapon designed to exhaust us. I became a ghost in my own town. I stopped going to the Rusty Anchor. I stopped mending nets on the porch where people could see me. Every move was calculated, every action documented in a leather-bound logbook Tom Brennan told me to keep. I was living my life as evidence, and it was strangling the soul out of me. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. A social worker named Ms. Chen, younger and harder-edged than the last, showed up for an unannounced visit. She went through the house with a forensic eye, her expression unreadable. Evan was at the kitchen table building a detailed model of a crab pot for a school project. his fingers deftly tying the tiny knots in the synthetic line. He's very skilled with his hands, Miss Chen observed, her tone neutral. He's a fisherman's son, I said, the pride in my voice a stark contrast to the defensiveness coiling in my gut. She didn't respond, just made a note on her clipboard. The silence was louder than any accusation. Later that afternoon, the real blow landed. My phone rang. It was Davy, the foreman of the processing plant where I sold my catch. Gage, I gotta tell you something. Some suits were just here. Lawyers, I think. Asking a lot of questions about your reliability. If you'd ever shown up drunk, if your catch was ever subpar, if you were what did they call it? A flight risk. The world tilted. They weren't just coming after me as a guardian. They were coming after my livelihood, my identity. They were trying to sink the second chance without ever setting foot on her deck. That night I couldn't sleep. The walls of the little house felt like they were pressing in. I needed air. I needed the sea. Slipping out quietly, I walked down to the dock. The second chance rocked gently in her slip, a solid, familiar shape in the mist. My sanctuary, my prison. I didn't hear her approach. One moment I was alone with the lap of water against the pilings, the next, her voice cut through the fog, smooth as polished glass. It doesn't have to be this hard, Gage. Lissa stepped out of the shadows near the bait shack. She was dressed for a board meeting, not a damp pier, a long trench coat over her suit. She looked triumphant. You're investigating my business now. The words came out rough-edged with a fury I could barely contain. I'm building a case, she corrected, as if explaining something simple to a child. A comprehensive one. The court needs to understand the full picture. An unstable home environment, a precarious financial situation. It's all relevant. He's happy. He's safe. That's all that's relevant. Is he? She took a step closer. Living with a man who's one bad season away from bankruptcy. A man who's clearly buckling under the pressure. I have reports of public confrontations, paranoia, reports you manufactured. She smiled, a thin, bloodless thing. Perception is reality, Gage. And the perception is that you're drowning. I'm just here to throw you a lifeline. Walk away, sign over guardianship. I'll make sure you get a settlement, a generous one. You can keep the boat, start over somewhere else. No one has to get hurt. Oh, there it was. The offer laid bare. Not a fight for a son, but a corporate takeover, an acquisition. She was so confident, so sure she'd already won. She'd turned my life into a hostile balance sheet, and Evan was the asset she was liquidating. The cold anger in my chest solidified into something else, something calm and deadly. You never understood him, I said, my voice low and steady on the still water. You never understood Rowan. You think this is about money. It was never about the money for him. It was about building something that lasted, something honest. Her smile didn't falter, but it tightened at the edges. Sentiment doesn't put food on the table or pay for college. No, I agreed. But it builds a kid who knows how to tie a bowline knot before he can write his name. It teaches him how to read the weather in the clouds and the truth in a man's eyes. What exactly are you going to teach him, Lissa? How to leverage assets, how to abandon people. Her composure cracked. Just for a second, a flash of pure, undiluted venom. You're a simple man, Gage. You always have been. You think this is a fairy tale where love conquers all. This is the real world. And in the real world, I will take him from you. I will grind you into nothing, and I will enjoy it. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking a final dismissive tattoo on the wooden pier before the fog swallowed her. I stood there for a long time, the damp seeping into my bones. She was right about one thing. I was a simple man. I worked with my hands. I fixed things that were broken. But she was wrong about the fairy tale. This wasn't about love conquering all. It was about war. And I just found my secret weapon. The next morning, I didn't go to the boat. I went to the Astoria Historical Society, a dusty, quiet building that smelled of old paper and forgotten stories. An elderly volunteer named Agnes looked up from her desk, her eyes bright with curiosity behind thick glasses. I need to see the old maritime deeds, I said, specifically the original ownership agreements for the North Channel fishing grounds, from the lawsuit about 12 years back. Agnes led me to a back room filled with towering shelves of ledgers and document boxes. It took me 2 hours, my fingers getting coated in ancient dust, but I found it. The settlement agreement wasn't just about money, it was about control. Tucked into a clause about future development rights was a stipulation of failsafe my brother had insisted on. In the event of a challenge to the guardianship of his heir, a third-party arbitrator, a representative chosen by the Fishermen's Union, would be brought in to assess the challenger's understanding and commitment to the asset's core value and legacy. Rowan hadn't just left Evan money, he'd left him a trap door, a way to ensure that whoever controlled his future understood the weight of it, that it wasn't just a bank account to be drained. It was a living, breathing thing tied to the sea and the community. Lissa, with her designer suits and her contempt for this world, would never see it coming. I was photocopying the relevant pages when my phone buzzed. It was Maria from the daycare. Gage, her voice was tense, scared. "You need to come, now." I ran. My heart was a hammer in my chest. I burst into the daycare center to a scene of controlled chaos. Maria was holding a sobbing Evan who was clutching his arm. His face was pale, his eyes wide with shock and pain. What happened? He fell from the climbing structure in the backyard. Maria said, her words tumbling out. He just slipped. But Gage, a woman was there, a blonde woman in a big car parked across the street. She watched the whole thing through the fence. She didn't move. She just watched. And when Evan fell, she smiled. Then she drove away. The world went red at the edges. The cold, calculating fury I'd felt on the pier ignited into a white-hot inferno. This wasn't a game of whispers and lawyers anymore. She'd crossed a line from manipulation to malice. She'd wanted to see him get hurt. At the urgent care, as the doctor set Evan's fractured wrist, my nephew looked up at me, his small jaw set against the pain. "She was there, Uncle Gage. She saw me fall." "I know, buddy." "Why would she do that?" I had no answer that wouldn't shatter him. I just squeezed his good hand. That night, after he was asleep, doped up on pain meds, I sat at the kitchen table with the photocopied deed in my logbook. The two documents told two different stories. One was a history of greed and cruelty. The other was a record of a life built day by careful day. Lissa had wanted to prove I was an unfit guardian. She'd wanted to show I couldn't keep him safe. But she'd made a catastrophic mistake. She'd shown her hand in front of a witness. She'd moved from the shadows into the light, and she'd given me everything I needed to end her. The point of no return wasn't a decision I made. It was a line she crossed. The war was no longer about custody. It was about survival, and I was done playing defense. The victory on the pier was a phantom. It felt solid in my hand one moment, then dissolved into mist the next. The clause from the old maritime deed, my brother's hidden weapon, was a double-edged sword. It gave us a chance, but it also dragged the entire town into our fight. My private war was now a public spectacle. The pressure didn't ease. It mutated. The anonymous calls to child services stopped. Instead, a new kind of attack began. A notice of violation from the city for an unpermitted structural modification to my dock, a repair I'd made 2 years ago. A surprise inspection from the Coast Guard on the second chance, citing a list of minor nitpicking discrepancies that would normally be overlooked. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts, a bureaucratic siege designed to drain my resources and my spirit. Lissa was no longer just a ghost in the fog. She was the fog itself, seeping into every crack, using systems and rules as her weapons. She'd hired a local fixer, a man named Crow, with a cheap suit and a knowing smile, who made it his business to be seen around town shaking hands and spreading a more subtle, more poisonous kind of doubt. Just concerned about the boy's future. Ashamed to see a good man like Gage struggling. All this stress can't be good for a child. Evan felt it. He withdrew, his quiet confidence replaced by a watchful tension. His broken wrist was a constant reminder in the sling he wore. He'd flinch at the sound of a car door slamming outside. The safe world I'd built for him was crumbling, and I was powerless to stop it. I was a fisherman, not a politician. I fought storms I could see. The hearing for the maritime arbitration was set. The arbitrator, a retired fisherman named Captain Joe Abernathy, a man with a face like a weathered chart and eyes that missed nothing, would meet us at the Fishermen's Union Hall. It was our best shot, our only shot. The night before the meeting, I couldn't breathe. The house was a tomb. Evan was finally asleep, his pain medication pulling him under. I slipped out the back door and walked not toward the water, but away from it, up into the steep wooded hills behind the town. The air was cold and clean, smelling of damp earth and pine. I needed to be somewhere she hadn't polluted. I found a fallen log overlooking the lights of Astoria spread out below the river, a black ribbon under a sliver of moon. This was where I'd come as a kid when my old man's drinking got bad. where Rowan and I would plan our escape to sea. It was the one place that had always been mine. And sitting there in the profound silence I broke. What was I doing? I was a boat captain with a high school education, going up against a woman with bottomless resources and a viciousness I couldn't comprehend. This arbitration was a Hail Mary. What if Abernathy saw me as just a simple, struggling man? What if Lissa's money had already found its way to him? I was risking everything, my boat, my home, my freedom on the word of a stranger. And worse, I was risking Evan. If I lost, she wouldn't just take him. She would erase me from his life completely. She would tell him I gave up, that I wasn't enough. I put my head in my hands. The truth I'd never told anyone, not even Rowan, clawed its way to the surface. I was terrified. I was exactly what she said. I was, a placeholder, a temporary fix. I'd never wanted kids. I liked my life solitary and simple. I'd taken Evan in because there was no one else, because the alternative was unthinkable. But did that make me a father, or just a decent bystander? Maybe he would be better off with her. Maybe all those things she could give him, the schools, the travel, the safety net of wealth, were what he deserved. Who was I to deny him that because I was scared to be alone again? The thought was a betrayal so profound it made me sick. But it was there in the dark whispering that surrender might be the most loving thing I could do. I must have sat there for an hour, hollowed out by doubt. The fight had gone out of me. I pictured walking into the Union Hall tomorrow and conceding, signing the papers, letting go. The image of driving away from Astoria alone was a physical pain in my chest. A crack of a twig behind me snapped my head up. I expected Crow or one of Lissa's hired men, but it was old man Henderson puffing slightly from the climb, a thermos in his hand. "Saw you heading up here," he said, his voice gravelly in the quiet. "Looked like you could use this." He unscrewed the thermos cap and handed it to me. It was coffee, strong and black, just how I liked it. I took it, my hands shaking slightly. "I'm in over my head, Henderson. We all are, son. That's what the sea teaches you. The second you think you're not, that's when she kills you." He sat down on the log beside me with a grunt. "This isn't about you. It feels like it is. It's about that boy, and it's about your brother." He looked out over the town. Rowan didn't just leave him money. He left him a choice between a life that means something and a life that just costs something. That woman down there, he gestured dismissively toward the lights. She doesn't want to raise a son. She wants to own a portfolio. You think Captain Joe Abernathy, a man who lost 2 sons to the sea, doesn't know the difference? He stood up, his joints popping. "You're not fighting her, Gage. You're bearing witness. You're showing up for your brother and for that boy when it counts. That's all any of us can do. Now drink your coffee. Tomorrow you go in there and you tell the truth. The whole truth. Let the chips fall where they may." He left me there with the thermos and his words. The cold knot of despair in my gut began to loosen, not into hope, but into resolve. Henderson was right. This wasn't about winning anymore. It was about standing up. It was about making sure Evan and everyone else knew exactly what was at stake. The next morning I dressed in my one good shirt. Evan, his face pale but determined, insisted on coming. "I need to hear it," he said, his good hand clenched at his side. "I need to know what she says." The Fisherman's Union Hall was packed. It seemed like every boat captain, deckhand, and processor in Astoria had shown up. This wasn't just my custody hearing anymore. It was a referendum on their way of life versus the outside forces trying to buy it. Captain Abernathy sat at the head of a long table, his presence silencing the room. Lissa was there with her lawyer and Crow. She looked out of place and irritated, her designer clothes a stark contrast to the worn flannel and denim around her. She'd expected a private meeting, not a public tribunal. The proceedings began. Her lawyer spoke first, smooth and condescending, talking about optimized futures and investment strategies, about maximizing Evan's potential in the global marketplace. He presented charts. He might as well have been speaking Martian. Then it was my turn. I didn't have charts. I had my logbook. I read entries aloud. October 12th, Evan learned to tie a bowline knot. Took him 20 tries, but he got it. Said he wanted to be ready to crew for me. November 3rd, he asked about what happened to his dad. We talked for an hour on the dock. Told him about the time Rowan fought a 20-foot wave to save a man overboard. He didn't cry. He just said, "I want to be that brave." I talked about the trust, not as a number, but as a responsibility. It's not a bank account. It's a share of the water that feeds this town. It's a legacy of the fight my brother won to keep it independent. Managing it means understanding the tides, the migration patterns, the families that depend on it. It means being part of this, I said, gesturing to the room full of silent watching faces. Then I turned to Lissa. What's the prevailing wind in the North Channel in March? What does a king crab quota mean to the family that fishes it? What's the first thing you do when a squall hits and your engine fails? She stared at me, her mask of contempt firmly in place. These are irrelevant technicalities. I would hire experts to manage those details. The room let out a collective quiet scoff. Captain Abernathy finally spoke, his voice low and steady. The clause stipulates an understanding of the asset's core value and legacy, Ms. Bray, not a willingness to hire a consultant. He turned his gaze on her. Why do you want this? She launched into her rehearsed speech about motherhood and second chances. Abernathy listened patiently, then cut her off. I read the police report from the old lodge. Why did you leave him there? Her composure flickered. I've explained that. I was unwell. And the reports from last week of you watching from across the street when the boy fell and broke his arm, did you enjoy it? The color drained from her face. Crow shifted uncomfortably. She hadn't known there were witnesses. That's a lie. I would never. Maria from the daycare is here, Abernathy said calmly. She's prepared to testify under oath. Would you like to call her in? Lissa's lawyer placed a hand on her arm, a silent warning. The room was utterly still. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. In that silence, Evan stood up. He walked to the front of the room, his small figure facing his mother. He didn't look at Abernathy or the crowd. He looked only at her. You smiled, he said, his voice clear and carrying in the silent hall. When I fell, you smiled, my own mom. The words hung in the air, simple, devastating, and utterly undeniable. It was the truth unveiled not by a lawyer or a document, but by the boy himself. It was the final piece of the puzzle delivered from the most unexpected source of all. Lissa said nothing. She just stared at her son with a look of pure, undiluted hatred. The mask was gone, incinerated in the glare of that single awful truth. There was no calculation left, no performance, only the ugliness beneath. Captain Abernathy didn't need to announce his decision. It was written in the set of his jaw, in the disgusted looks from every fisherman in the room. The battle wasn't over, the legal war would continue, but the soul of it had been decided right here in this hall. We had won. But as I looked at Evan standing tall before the ruins of his mother, I felt no triumph. Only a deep, cold sorrow and the terrifying weight of what came next. The old county courthouse in Missoula smelled of lemon polish and generations of whispered secrets. I sat beside Evan at the plaintiff's table, my work-roughened hands resting on the polished wood. Across the aisle, Lissa Bray looked like a page from a magazine I'd never read, sleek, expensive, and utterly foreign to this world of creaking floorboards and stern-faced justice. Tom Brennan leaned close, his voice a low rumble. Remember, she's selling a story. We're telling the truth. The bailiff's call cut through the murmuring room. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Hendricks. The judge took her seat with the weary grace of someone who'd seen every flavor of human failure. Her eyes scanned the documents before her, then lifted to take us all in. Lissa's lawyer, David Morrison, stood first, a shark in a $1,000 suit. Your Honor, this case is about redemption. He began, voice smooth as poured oil. A mother's journey back from grief to reclaim the child she lost through circumstances beyond her control. He painted pretty pictures of private schools and European vacations, of opportunities in glass towers that looked nothing like my welding shop. Each word felt like a layer of varnish covering rotten wood. When Tom rose, he moved like a rancher checking fence lines, steady, thorough, no flash needed. This isn't about opportunities, he said, his voice filling the room without straining. It's about a boy who was left to freeze in the Bitterroots 10 years ago by the woman now claiming she wants him back. He laid out our evidence like tools on a workbench. School records, medical reports, the CPS findings. Solid, honest things. Then he called me to the stand. Morrison's cross-examination came at me like hailstones. You're a welder, Mr. Harlan. Not much money in that, is there? Enough. And you think that's sufficient for a boy with Evan's potential? I think love's more important than bank accounts. He tried to twist that, make it sound small, but the truth has a weight cheap words can't lift. Then Lissa took the stand, dabbing at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. She talked about therapy and transformation, about becoming the mother Evan deserved. She almost had me believing her until Tom approached with the quiet intensity of a storm moving in. Ms. Bray, how many birthdays did you miss? I was working through, 10 birthdays. How many Christmases? Those were difficult. 10 Christmases. Tom let the numbers hang in the air. And after abandoning your son in below freezing temperatures, where did you go? I needed space to heal. You left with Dale Wickham, a trucker you'd known 3 days. Drove to Reno and married him at a chapel that offered free champagne. That your idea of healing, Lys's composure cracked like thin ice. That was a mistake. Like leaving your child to die was a mistake. Morrison objected, but the damage was done. The truth was out, ugly and raw. Then Evan took the stand's shoulders squared like he was facing a strong wind. Judge Hendricks spoke to him gently, but his answers came clear and firm. Where would you prefer to live, Evan? With my uncle. Why? Because he's my home. When Tom played the Hannigan's recording, Lys's voice filled the courtroom, slick with alcohol and greed, talking about military school and trust funds. The mask fell completely. She wasn't a grieving mother. She was a prospector looking to stake a claim. During recess, I found Evan staring out a window at the mountains. You okay? She didn't even look at me during that recording, he said quietly. Not once. Some people see reflections where there should be people. Judge Hendricks' verdict was swift and final. The petition is denied. Guardianship remains with Mr. Harlan. And Ms. Bray, my courtroom sees through performance art. Outside, Lyssa stormed past without a glance, her heels striking the concrete like gunshots. Evan watched her go, his face unreadable. She never really saw me, did she? No, I said, but that's her loss, not yours. The drive home felt like coming up for air after being underwater too long. The mountains welcomed us back solid and unchanging. A week later, we were rebuilding a '68 Mustang engine when Evan wiped grease from his hands. I've been thinking about the trust fund. Yeah, when I turn 21, I want to expand the shop. Maybe add a training program for kids who need a place to belong. I felt something warm spread through my chest. That what you want? It's what Dad would have wanted. Building something that lasts. That evening, we drove up the old logging road, the same one where they'd found him a decade earlier. But this time, we weren't running from anything. We were claiming our ground. The pines whispered in the wind, keeping their secrets. Some things endure. Some things are worth fighting for. Uncle Gage, Penny. Yeah, buddy. Thanks for not giving up on me. Never crossed my mind. The sun set behind the peaks, painting the sky in colors worth staying for. We were home.